Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Native Wellness Power Hour. And I am very pleased to be here with everybody today. So I was just seeing if I could actually see the Power Hour, but if you just give me a moment, I'm trying to, the internet is a lovely thing. So welcome again to the Native Wellness Power Hour. And today my title was to talk about was in a good way, wellness in a good way, if you want to say. My name is NewBreast, and I'm coming to you from the Blackfeet. I'm coming to you from my house, but it's on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. And currently we are having rain, and one of my relatives just told me that they heard thunder. So it may, thunder and lightning may occur. You might hear a boom in the background. Just warning you. It's the right kind of boom, the creator's boom. But I just am looking forward to today to sharing this time with you. And I was really, I want to be mindful of the time we're in. And we've had another change, right? Another big change where many of our people that they're now able to move around more freely than in the past. I guess it's now like 15 months, 16 months, depending on when your community went into the quarantine or had the restrictions about essential activity only. I don't like to use that word lockdown because most of the time I don't lock my door, so it doesn't really apply to me. But I also want to talk about like looking back on, I guess my wellness journey started when I was born, because the fact that I could be alive showed my ancestors' commitment, my parents' commitment, that in any type of time, good times, bad times, happy times, trying times, they always were able to get through it. And I grew up with this, hearing this slogan off and on about describing people who were some of the kindest people, because there were stories about their great kindness, but they would also use this expression about them. They're old time tough. And I was kind of old time tough, kind of like, because I thought I was a tough kid, so, but old time tough, I used to think about that all the time. And so with some of the sloganing and the messaging, the hashtags, that I've seen on social media, but also that I've been privileged to hear people speak about, there's a lot of phrases of encouragement. And then I also wanted to just really recognize that part of if you want to say, the phrases of encouragement or the phrases of wellness that the Native Wellness Institute uses in their training, in their work, in their intentions, is to be positive, proactive, and productive. And so sometimes the sloganings that we hear people say, or maybe I had a lot of my own aha moments when I was first understanding that what happened in my life and in the lives of my relatives before me, that it was impacted by something, by politics, social politics, or whatever, that an encroachment onto our way of life. And how did they get through that? You know, how could somebody still in the living generation, knowing that all the things they endured, that they continued on? And so I kind of wanted to touch on that today, like sort of that theme. How, you know, how do we not get stuck? Or really that, you know, we had like good news, but that good news, or we had news this week, I'm not going to say it's good or bad, about on this side of the line in the United States, you know, the impact or the acknowledgement that boarding schools affected all our families, whether or not your ancestor was put in one of them, or your parents, or you yourself attended, or maybe your grandchildren in the modern era went to boarding school. But we're all affected by that. But I also want to encourage people. You can every day in your life, every minute, contribute to the healing and to the spiritual comfort that you can give the ancestors by taking care of yourself. Doesn't mean that you're not aware, doesn't mean that you're in denial. But I want to talk about a phrase that in English that comes from, you know, a thought about the year, and it's appropriate to the year that we've been through. That rest is resistance. Rest is healing. Rest is restoring. And often when, you know, in wellness, when people, you know, or like there's a lot of trainings, there's been, you know, really good encouragement along the way about how people take care of themselves, and that phrase self-care. Well, rest is a gift that we were given as part of being a living being. We have the ability to sleep. And you wonder, like all creatures, right? A lot of our animal relatives and our, you know, whatever form they can, the winged ones, insects, there's always a period of restoration. And even in, you know, like, so we can learn a lot also from just acknowledging that we share on the planet. Even trees rest, they go dormant. They have seasons where they bloom. And one of the things that I think that is really kind of interesting is like if you go to like a gardening store and they say perennial and then annual, and annual means that you have to continually buy the seeds. So I always thought that was like a funny division, because it was like, well, if you annual only grows once a year, why you also have to buy those seeds? Where those seeds come from? And when you start looking at how rest is in the natural world, you start seeing that really all things that grow, like in the plant world, are perennials. They start being impacted by other things. And that's kind of some ways like I see not only wellness, but how you live through healing the trauma. So all of us, by being alive, if you know, held on from infancy and you're living, or you know, your spirit came to this earth and now you're a living human being, you have already participated in healing. Because just like the natural way of being of like the plant world, if we take lessons from our, you know, the plant medicines, our relatives, you can see that they know how to rest. They restore. they're resilient, they have faith, and they offer up their seeds to the next generation, and they adapt. We're seeing that now in the earth. So part of rest is really taking a moment to also acknowledge that it's part of the natural ebb and flow. But over the last year, when, the dial was turned up on everybody, globally, and there wasn't sometimes those pauses, and there was ways that were offered to us as consumers to spend our waking moments, when you're at home, when you're confined, when, you're making the decision on behalf of yourself and others before the vaccines, not to go out and, share your droplets with other people or get their droplets, unintended droplets. There could be a whole bunch of jokes. So hopefully somebody else who does this power hour, Casey Nicholson, maybe he'll make some jokes about droplets, sharing droplets. What do you do to care? There's just so much in there. But so I was really thinking about that, like in the last couple of weeks, where I have noticed when I go out my front door or I drive past, on the reservation, because there are like, during the pandemic, there were weeks when I never left the reservation, and I feel that I was blessed to be able to be on a land base, 50 by 75 square miles, 1.5 million acres. And so when I go out, I notice things. And one of the things I noticed was, like the last couple of years we had, it's not an invasive plant. I don't like to talk about plants because everything has a purpose, as like invasive. But I noticed like a visitor plant was showing up more and more. And I also noticed the absence of some wildflowers, and particularly the wild iris. So this year, when I was out taking care of that, sometimes it's like those visitors, they actually like become a resident in your house, humans or otherwise. So you got to encourage them, to move on, because they're a visitor. And so I was outside and I seen 4 wild irises sprouting. So I made sure to drive around the mower. And then yesterday, unintentionally, I didn't know it was an occupied anthill, so I brushed it. And I stopped and I just said, "I'm sorry, I will go around you." So then there's one clump of grass sticking up because it's somebody's house, it's an ant's house. And so we all have a function, like the ants, like an ant colony's role in creation to restore soil, and for the wildflowers to not only give you encouragement that the world is full of beauty with their pebbles and stuff, but also to say that our perennial time is still happening. 100 years ago or 500 years ago, when my ancestors seen the wild iris in spring, that's the same flower I'm seeing. And so when I was driving, I noticed that this is a year, for me, it's been many things, but how I could see the regeneration and just the bounty of the wild iris all across over, I did a round trip drive of like 160 miles, which is just like a normal thing to do your task on the road. And just the abundance of the wild iris. And I was encouraged by that. And so that concept of rest, it's not that you're not doing things. It's not that it's not, you're not, you can't put a price on it, because rest is an ingredient for wellness. But it can do things. It might mean sleeping. It might mean taking a 5-minute stretch. If your job is that you're engaging on the computer, you stand up, you stretch, you move around, because you're helping one part of, through movement, you start helping your whole body restore. And I just love some of the videos that are appearing now that Indians can break out after the first year of the pandemic. And, we're ready. It's going to be like an Indian relay this summer. It already is, people whipping on both sides to get to events, just to be around people, for things where you can see people and not be masked, or be masked if you're under the age of 12, that's up to your guardians or whoever's raising you. But, as adults, we still need to care for the kids, because we're still in a pandemic. And everybody's not making that decision. So I believe in free will is the Indian way, and it also, I was mindful of one time, my dad, but I've heard this story in other ways told, where like you come to these points in your life and like you're on this trail, and then there's something over here that gets your attention, and then the trail over here, or maybe sometimes in the modern era, you're on this trail early in your life, and then there's all these other trails. And at those points, reflection of which way you're going to continue to give your energy, to pay your good life energy on which path. And so it was, it was told to me that on the path of the Creator, you know where you're going. But it isn't that it's the wrong choice, it's just another choice. If you go on these other paths you see, and you go down them. And then, good Indian storytellers, they always have that pause. So they say that. So even now, if you're on the Creator's road or the Creator's path, you know where you're going. That's your life path. But if you have these other choices and you go there, they may lead you back to that way. But they pause. And then this is what I was told. If you go those other ways, you're on your own luck. And some people are really lucky. Some people, it's genetic. No, okay. All the stick game players going, yeah, or I guess, but so I was thinking about all these short stories, slogans, words, how powerful words are. But that phrase, rest is resistance. Rest is restorative. Rest is healing. Healing is an action, and rest is an action. It's not without its benefits. And if rest involves sleep, that's when the dreams come, or when, I had a relative share how they needed an eagle feather for their child, and they didn't know how they were going to get one. And it's the pandemic. Right, so you can't drive over to your cousin's house and go in and say, hey, or your auntie, hey, and so they had put their intention on getting it somehow. That was their goal. and they were praying and doing, you know, all they could. And they went out walking, and there in their path was the answer to their prayers. So that's a living generation story. That's how powerful those moccasin prints of ancestors are when we walk their way, when we are the new moccasins on that trail. Is we get answers. And for much of my, I don't know, I mean, my only real career is being an Indian. And LinkedIn does not have a space for that. I want to put under occupation, Indian, Pikuni, you know, kind of, but anyway. So I was also thinking about when ourselves, like we may have a friend call us up and, you know, maybe they need to be reminded to, like, it's okay to pause, or, you know, but we must be our own friend and remind ourselves. So in this environment, one of the things that it can trick you, right? And everybody knows a trickster, right? We all have stories how, you know, good and bad, they teach you and they help you recenter, you know, and be reflective. They're sometimes cautionary, or they're things to say, you can choose to do that, but this might happen. You know, it's like those knowledge stories or our wisdom that gets passed down. So I was thinking about that, you know, in terms of getting ready for today. And there's another phrase, and I just hashtag this to somebody on a message, because they were responding to the announcement by Secretary Holland, or Holland, I think that's how you say her name, you know, and the Department of Interior acknowledging the boarding school. So they were responding to that. And many, many years ago, in a land far, no, many, many years ago, when the conferences were big. That's my own joke. Because when I was a child, no Indians were going to conferences, and then suddenly, poof, you know, for a while there, I could have had a whole outfit out of all my conference stuff, you know, and then people started giving out toiletries with their branding on it. I was like, cool, you know. So anyway, but so conferences were always a way in wellness. Like I can remember, you know, like a wellness conference in Denver, Colorado, for Indians, and I'm talking about, and indigenous people, how there were nearly 500 people there. 500 Indians drawing together in a good way, that energy that says, we've suffered, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to heal. And so one of the teachings that came out of that for myself, and I've said it to myself on many days, it's in many of my past journals, you know, that I keep, and now I'm hashtagging it because it's one of those things, like kind of like the English word kindness. Does kindness ever go out of fashion? No. I'm just in case you were wondering. So, but this is that slogan. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. And so that meant many things at that time in the early 90s in those movements, in the wellness movements. What that was a recognition that the things that had caused fracturing in our communities, of our culture, of our families, of our gender roles, of our land base, of, you know, the very animals that we hold sacred, you know, the buffalo, or for many people, you know, the salmon, the fish, all the winged ones, those fractionings, to address them, sometimes that seemed like such a big job. How you are, a task, how are you going to do it? And so when I heard that phrase, it's never too late to have a happy childhood, I was like, first I had to say, did Indians have a childhood? Like, yes, they did. But we called it something different. We called when children, like elders, they hold a connection to the spiritual world than the folks in the middle. But we're all equal, right? Because if you think of the way sometimes, like it helps me like vision things, because I'm more like abstract learner or person or whatever, I don't know, whatever you want to say. But sometimes the vision I use is where the hoop that we're all connected in, that it's the same hoop, but just some of us are in the spirit world and some of us are here on earth in the living generation. So I had to mull over when I first heard that slogan. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. And so I still use that word childhood, but it means something. I'm waiting for my internet connection is on stable messaging to go off, so I'll continue. But it means something also culturally specific to each and every person out there. But what it also includes when, like I was thinking about it, is that there were oftentimes in my life where if people looked at me, they thought I was a child. I was a child. I mean, I was short or whatever, but still confined to school. And so really what I began to understand in the wellness movement was that it meant it's okay to play. It's okay to rest. It's okay to understand that, like, let's say, if you get a group of Indian kids together, I guess now, just to be relevant, over the age of 12, and they've all been vaccinated, so they're outdoors or whatever. And they could be from everywhere else, but if they're situationally in a circle, they start making friends. They start organizing into a little situational community. And what I learned from thinking like that, like it's never too late to have a happy childhood, it also meant that it was okay to have a friend and then for you both to follow your paths, what they were. Because you will always be friends, even if in that minute you're not companions in that minute. And so when I think about that, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. It's that also happiness and joy is resistance. Happiness and joy is healing, is part of wellness. Finding things that you like, and you don't have to justify or explain them. They're just things you like that you find wonderment in. Like today, you see Buddy, that's his name. When I seen Buddy, I was just like, I gotta have, and already that's what I was thinking of his Buddy. It doesn't say that. That was just, I just knew that was his name. So it's ageless, that type of, finding joy in things, finding, remember those fidget spinners for a while that were, they were like really popular. Well, I seen elders fiddling with them, and they were just enjoying them as much as anybody else. And so really that's also, you don't end any part of your history that you walked through before. It's part of you. It's part of every living moment. And so it's like a reminder, it's never too late to have a happy childhood, that is also ageless. Just like the acts of kindness are ageless. It doesn't matter where you are in your life path, but to have those moments of fun, play, joy, happiness, and that it's a reminder that is, if I want to say, self-care. So if you like, jokes, or you find you have what people call a hobby, I always call them like they're like a celebration of your creative expression, because it's usually things that help you get through whatever's happening. Or maybe your expression of congratulating somebody is making something, or you're a part of another family who you don't even know. Maybe they've asked you to make something, or you make things and you send them off, like songs, or you think of catchy phrases. Or sometimes when in Montana, we drive a lot. And so I always think it's great that on the satellite radio I subscribe to, that I can listen to Broadway hits. Because if you ever wanted to be exaggerated in your behavior, that's musical theater. But also, it's just listening also to other people's stories of creativity. And so for me, those are also what I need to do. I need to have those on my wellness path. And I need to find a balance to the digitalization of my Indian existence. I could be dramatic. But I was also thinking about how to, that phrase, in a good way. I heard that from many community voices everywhere. But I know differently what to move forward in a good way means. It's different now than it was 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or even 18 months ago. And so I also wanted to talk about what's happening currently all over. It's not just Indian country, but since all of North America, Indian countries everywhere, but other communities are there, and other people from other cultures now. And so as all of the communities are coming out of this, we had to suddenly adopt new lifestyles in order to get to today. And I'm not going to say survive, because there are people that to continue their way of being the last year was to not comply. And complying was optional in this country to any measure. So, but now we're all moving more together. And I heard a number of relatives talk about, they had seen an NBA game and how everybody was riled up. And sports can rile up, people, but how there was actually like violence. And so, and then I've heard other things, how now that we're more free to move around, go around, everybody has a choice about how they're going to move forward. And choosing to move forward in a good way, it's not a choice. It's like an action of what you're saying, how I'm going to go back out into the world, and understanding that to pause and take a breath is sometimes what you need right now when you go out into crowds or go out into larger social groups. Or maybe, you just have that far off relative that you haven't seen, and it just has been really, it's been a separation that you need to end. And so you may, we're going to have the border, the Canadian border here open up in a different way July 5th. And since so many of the relatives are up there and we're down here, how we choose to even approach that that condition we live under, the port of entry. So we always say, everybody in our confederacy, they're, to be a real person, or in the suite to be that you approach everything like that. And it's just like, so what I've come to understand, like to move forward in a good way, is that you stay in the moment. And the easiest way to stay in the moment is to breathe. And I was on this medium with some other, like if I told you, well, currently I'm in Washington, D.C., you would not know, right? So when people say I'm here on this medium, wouldn't say. But so I was with this group of people on this medium, and we were talking about like just a beautiful thing of collaborative effort, supporting, all our communities, just really a celebration of traditional ways of life. But the tempo of the meeting didn't reflect what was coming out. And in this space, it creates a false reality in some senses because it's so quick. And sometimes hurrying makes you a little stiff if you have to hurry, right? But really, like, if you want to say like a way to get through when you're at a fast clip is you stay flexible. You go with the flow, but you don't lose yourself. And so, so I started telling jokes and I said, remember, you have to laugh in this medium. You have to laugh, because otherwise, just the way it is constructed, sometimes you end up holding your breath, or you end up not having that good full breath to keep you really engaged. And then I seen how early on in this medium, they were trying to even control how people do, present themselves. And so they would say, why do some people wave goodbye at the end of a Zoom call? As if, Miss Manners did not want you to wave, because you're supposed to use that little electronic hand, right? And I was just like, for me, my wave is my resistance. My wave is my wellness, because how we use this medium is our free will. And how I choose to use this medium is for the same thing that I do off camera, is to be in a good way. But I want to share a joke with you that, because you can all do it. So I'm not saying you got to do this on your next interaction. Like if you're trying to romance somebody over FaceTime, you got to think about using this. Okay, I'll just say that. Because now look at all those people that you were romancing. You could now go and see in real life. I'm not going to say they're going to, I guess I should tell you a secret about this medium. Sometimes in real life, there are no filters. So that's all I want to say. That's your anti-advice for the day. But I was telling them a joke. But first I had to preface, because there's many age groups. So I told him, you know how if I say fry bread, right, instantly everybody, you know, they know what I'm saying, right? Fry bread. But when I was little and what my parents called it and what my community called it, and their generations back when the first um, treaty rations came into our community or put on the reservation, they had two things. Well, sometimes they didn't have two things. Sometimes they didn't have none things. But one of the things that was introduced was lard from other animals. Because we did use buffalo fat, but it was, oops, somebody's calling me. Sorry, I thought I put that on. But so we called what came out grease bread. We didn't call it fried bread until the modern times. I'd say like the late 1980, you know, you could still hear generations saying grease bread instead of fried bread. And if you take those two English words, like if I tell you, oh, here's a piece of grease bread now, right? Especially, you know, I mean, but now people would go, because grease now have a different connotation. But if I want to say, when those things came into our world, we understood the power of, if you want to say omega-3, like superfood and the natural wild animal fats and rendering of, you know, of that for medicines and stuff. So, but we called it grease bread until the modern era. So I shared that with them because they were from different age groups than me, and they were like, grease bread? You know, because everybody grew up, most people, fry bread. But I was saying, oh yeah, and if you get too hot in the summer, you know, you start looking like a grease bread. And I realized they didn't know what that meant. So use this if you want. Every Indian can look like a grease bread this summer when it gets hot. And that's kind of how you look. That's kind of how a grease bread looks. And then also, you know, like the fry breads are like big. Well, the grease breads were small. And that was enough. And then there was, because we did use that type of high omega-3 fat in our perennial grease legacy, our ancestral perennial grease legacy. That sounds so beautiful. That we adapted when that was withdrawn to lard. And so there are like, my mom just shared with my sister and I yesterday, like a extremely happy memory of her older sister, who's 10 years older than her, who now is, you know, in the spirit world. And my mom was reminiscing of how when she was a little girl and she'd make her a sandwich, and this was her sandwich, you know, one of their mother's homemade buns, bread, you know, someone makes at home, a bun, a roll, that's the other English. So take that and then put lard on it, cut some salt pork raw, and slap a raw onion on it, and lay on a blanket in the shade of their house in the summer with the grass around them, and eat their sandwich. And so I started saying, well, you know, Mom, like, that kind of makes sense, because also in our traditional foodways, we had those where we used parts of the animal, and with other earth medicines, you know, make peppermint rolls, and they were made with the grease, with the fat, the high omega-3 fat. And it wasn't made in now what you would call a high temperature, because, you know, they didn't. Electric stoves are like a recent, or a gas stove is like a recent invention. because the way we interfaced with like food was different. It involved like the grandmother and grandfather stones and water, and just the preparation was different. But in the modern era, when we were forbidden, denied, didn't have access to that. So when I think of that phrase, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. There are other things that are in there that, if you think about a child or a young person, they're encouraged to follow their dreams. That's our whole mission in life, to live your dreams, because they involve the gifts that we were each given. And so when you think about that, and that you carry your childhood through your whole life, it's never too late. You never stop dreaming. You never stop having ambition to pursue something that you're interested in. And in the modern era, it's like if your time doesn't end up in cash, right? Then we've learned to hear that dream differently, because we're influenced by the outside world, by the ads on our social media stream, that you need this to get those things to make you happy. But it's never too late to follow a dream and to get a new dream. There are many, if you want to say, trailblazers or people that, like, because I was many times, like when they moved the camps before, and you could, because we had the ability to make fire anywhere, but sometimes they carried the coal from one camp to the next. And so in the wellness movement, there were many people that their journey evolved where they became the carrier of that coal. And they went around until they found that camp of wellness, and then they were ready to start the fire. And so I think of that also. If you think about yourself, you have the coal of that dream in you. And all you have to do, give it air, give it something to feed it. Because fire in itself is beautiful, but it's how you interact with it. The conditions that it has its own journey. I've heard this phrase by many of our long tradition of American Indian, Alaskan Native, and other indigenous people around the world also became like wildland firefighters. And them share with us like their experience, because I never did that, and that fire creates its own environment. So it's the same thing, like that buffalo, like maybe carrying the coal of a fire from a buffalo chip and a buffalo horn to the new camp. So that type of like part in you, it's in you. So that phrase, it's never too late to have a happy childhood, is also about that. It's also about taking and then giving breath to that dream. And where do you get the clarity? Where do you find that camp that you're looking for? That sense of belonging, that you can feel relaxed maybe, or you feel connected in a way that you had longed for, or you didn't know existed, and you can find a home in that camp, even for a couple of days. That's kind of sometimes what conferences are, right? Or vacations, or, now in this time, reuniting in a good way with people we haven't seen. And how we choose to express ourselves as we're reunited, we have a choice. Maybe, you know, in the time before the pandemic, we thought of people one way or somehow, and it's a choice. If when you see that that person has survived, how are you going to greet them? Because for me, I just, every time I go out, even if I don't know them, if they're not Indian, it doesn't matter. I just am so happy that people have got to this point. So there's something that we're all meant to do, and to move forward in a good way. That's like a slogan that came from way before my birth. You know, you move forward in a good way. But I also wanted to talk about in these last couple minutes that rest is part of finding what that heart is in, of taking that journey, of celebrating, going outside, you know, feeling the rain on your face or the sunshine. Or I told my sister, one of my sisters was actually on the California coast near the ocean. And I said, oh, I miss the big water, I miss the ocean. So she was out on her walk, and so she photographed it or videoed it and sent me a little snippet. So I watched it over and over. And you know, when you watch a video over on your phone, I can't help it, but my head goes, because it's like, it's unconditioned. But so if you have a dream that you have got back in touch, where we've had this year of rest and restoration, and this period we're coming back out, I guess that's my wish for all of us, that we embrace that. We deserve rest. We deserve happiness. We deserve joy. We deserve to address all those things that we must, because we're the generation that's living. And way before our lifetimes, they knew we could handle it. And so I would also like to encourage, give yourself a pat on the back, give yourself a hug, give yourself a kiss, you know, because we're all part of the ancestors' dreams. And we can be a community of support to each other, to celebrate, to understand that each of us has a right to live freely, live our dreams, because that is really what our life was given by the Creator for. And that this next period that we're going to go through, next couple months, the next summer, you know, do the practical things. Do the practical things also. You know, rest, wear your seatbelt, drink enough water, you know, eat good food, you know, take care of each other, give encouragement, you know, celebrate with kindness. And I had a healer who helped me one time. He told me this. He said, he was telling me like how to deal with people if they're angry or agitated or otherwise, you know, a little staticky. You know, it's easy to be that way. So this is what I told you, pray for understanding. And I think pausing and breathing and going looking for those wildflowers, no matter where you are, even if you had to Google wild iris because you've never seen one, I hope that that's what your path is this summer. It's full of those beautiful people, things, tastes, smells. I can't wait to smell a crowd of Indians. I don't know about you. So with that, I'd like to end the Native Wellness Power Hour of moving forward in a good way. And I wish you wellness, happiness, rest, and laughter. So take care and hope to see you in real life. Ooh, I want to squeeze you. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.